Directly, it was seen that the drug had worked. And that's what Schoenfield said back in 1963. Deeply influenced by Schonfield's research, the authors of the international bestseller, The Holy Blood and the Holy Grail, expanded more fully on this theme in the early 1980s. In the fourth gospel, Jesus, hanging on the cross, declares that he thirsts. In reply to this complaint, he has proffered a sponge allegedly soaked in vinegar, an incident that also occurs in the other gospels. This sponge is generally interpreted as another act of sadistic derision. But was it really? Vinegar, or soured wine, is a temporary stimulant, with effects not unlike smelling salts. It was often used at that time to resuscitate flagging slaves on galleys. For a wounded and exhausted man, a sniff or a taste of vinegar would induce a restorative effect, a momentary surge of energy. And yet in Jesus' case, the effect is just the contrary. No sooner does he inhale or taste the sponge than he pronounces his final word and gives up the ghost. Such a reaction to vinegar is physiologically inexplicable. On the other hand, such a reaction would be perfectly compatible with a sponge soaked not in vinegar, but in some type of soporific drug, a compound of opium and or belladonna, for instance, commonly employed in the Middle East at that time. But why proffer a soporific drug, unless the act of doing so, along with all the other components of the Cruci-Fiction, were elements of a complex and ingenious stratagem, a stratagem designed to produce a semblance of death when the victim in fact was still alive. Such a stratagem would not only have saved Jesus' life, but also have realized the Old Testament prophecies of the Messiah. So that's what the authors of the Holy Blood and the Holy Grail had to say on the matter. And, as we have shown, besides opium and belladonna and mandrake, the substance used to induce deathlike stupor could have also been a preparation of cannabis hemp. More than a century ago, R. McMeans wrote that some high biblical scholars and commentators maintain that the gall and vinegar or mirrored wine offered to our Savior immediately before his crucifixion was in all probability a preparation of hemp, and even speak of its earlier use. And that was like Dr. McKean's in 1860. And now, as Jesus' crucifixion is said to have taken place during the Passover, it is also interesting to note that hemp may have been widely available at that time. For according to comments of Emanuel Lowe in his German ethnobotanical text, Die Flower der Juden, the Passover incense contained cannabis resins, and that book was written in 1926. A connection that is made even more curious by a thematic reference that states, the one on his way to execution was given a piece of incense and a cup of wine to help him fall asleep. Now, close to our own time and more independently, the German researcher Holger Kirsten has also suggested that cannabis may have been amongst the ingredients in the drink which put Jesus into his death-like stupor. Now, this is what Holger Kirsten writes in his Jesus Lived in India. How did Jesus come apparently to die immediately after he had taken the bitter drink? Was it really vinegar that he was given? Perhaps the supposed drink of vinegar instead contained the active ingredients of the sacred drink of the Indians and Persians, soma and heoma, respectively. Soma, the sacred drink of India, enabled an adept to enter a death-like state for several days, and to awaken afterwards in an elated state that lasted a few days more. In this state of ecstasy, a higher consciousness spoke through the adept, and he had visionary powers. In addition to Asclepius acidia, the soma might also have contained Indian hemp, Cannabis indica. Tradition has it that it is featured in the drink of Zarathustra. So that's what Holger Kirsten wrote in 1986. Now, if Jesus had received such a preparation, right, we can imagine the Jews and Romans coming to see yet another Messiah, because there was lots of people claiming to be the Messiah at that time, crucified on the cross, right? And in the case of Jesus, he's given this potion, and for all apparent reasons, he seems to be drifting off into death. His limbs stiffen, his breath drops, all blood coagulates, and for all visible purposes, he's dead, And in fact, John 19 fills us in on a little bit about the events of this. And this is from John 19 in the New Testament. Later, knowing that all was now completed, and so that the scriptures would be fulfilled, Jesus said, I am thirsty. A jar of wine vinegar was there, so they soaked a sponge in it, put the sponge on a stalk of a hyssop plant, and lifted it to Jesus' lips. When he received the drink, Jesus said, "It is finished." With that, he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. Now, the next day was to be a special Sabbath, because the Jews did not want the bodies left on the crosses during the Sabbath. They asked Pilate to have the legs broken and the bodies taken down. The soldiers, therefore, came and broke the legs of the first man that was crucified with Jesus, and then those of the other. But when they came to Jesus, they found he was already dead. They did not break his legs. Now, it should be pointed out that, it's kind of ironic that Jesus is said to spend 3 days and 3 nights on the cross, but somehow this only goes from Friday night till Sunday morning. So there's an anomaly there to begin with. But generally, when you died on the cross, you died from suffocation. Eventually, you couldn't hold yourself up anymore from the pain from the nails driven through your feet and hands. Also, your muscles would give out, and your your rib cage would press in on your lungs, and you suffocated. In Jesus' case, this happened so quickly, it was curious. The other guys had to have their legs broken, but Jesus died right after he was given the drink, right? And so, in order to justify, justify concerns about this, we're told that the soldiers do not break his legs, but instead pierce Christ's side to make sure he's dead with a spear. And there is even a witness to this one unnamed bystander. This is the only guy he's not even named in the Bible, right? But he's like the whole witness to the spirits, and that's it. And he says, and it says in the Bible, "The man who saw it has given testimony, and his testimony is true. He knows that he tells the truth, and he testifies so that you may also believe." Well, the man doth protest too much, in my opinion. Professor Morton Smith has suggested the story of the spear thrust into Jesus' side may have been introduced to historicize certain Old Testament testimonies, and that has to do with he was pierced somewhere in Ezekiel or something like that. Now, I'll continue here with a quote from Schoenfield, who kind of sets the stage for us. "It is the moment before sundown in Jerusalem. On the hill of Golgotha, 3 bodies are suspended on crosses. 2, the thieves are dead. 3rd appears so. This is the drugged body of Jesus of Nazareth, the man who planned his own crucifixion, who contrived to be given a soporific potion to put him into a deathlike trance. Now Joseph of Arimathea, bearing clean linen and spices, approaches and recovers the still form of Jesus. All seems to be proceeding according to plan." That's from Hugh Schoenfield in 1963. Now, the aloes and spices brought by Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea to Jesus' tomb to supposedly embalm their now dead leader pose a particularly curious question, as embalming was not a practice of the Jews at the time. So what were they doing with all those aloes and veres? Perhaps these lotions served some other purpose. Quote, "In reality, there were efforts behind the scenes to bring Jesus back to life in the privacy of the tomb or cavern under the direction of Joseph and Nicodemus," end quote, Kirsten. Now these are Jesus' as described in the New Testament, secret servants. They show up at his tomb after he's been taken down from the cross. They got all these aloes and various stuff you use for healing, linens, and they go to claim the body of Jesus from the tomb, right? And now we'll slip into the New Testament narrative from the Gospel of John. Later, Joseph of Arimathea asked Pilate for the body of Jesus. Now Joseph was a disciple of Jesus, but secretly because he feared the Jews. With Pilate's permission, he came and took the body away. He was accompanied by Nicodemus, the man who had earlier visited Jesus at night. Nicodemus brought a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 75 pounds. Taking Jesus' body, the two then wrapped it with spices and strips of linen. This was in accordance with Jewish burial customs. No, it wasn't actually. The Jewish burial custom was where they covered them in hemp cloth, according to other sources. And at that place where Jesus was crucified, there was a garden. And in the garden, a new tomb in which no one had ever been laid. So he's put in a tomb. No one's ever even been laid in the tomb. His secret servants go and pick him up. And all of a sudden, there's a big mystery because Jesus' body is missing from the tomb the next day. So then if Jesus escaped the cross, what happened to him? How come there's no further history? Well, that's not exactly the case. You see, the Gnostics have further adventures of Jesus in many of their texts, and they disputed the crucifixion. In fact, disputing the crucifixion has been resulted in the death of a number of different sects, from the Templars to the Cathars, all the way back to Gnostics. And that's always been one of the number one heresies, and I'll explain why in a little while. But O.M. Burke, in his book Among the Dervishes, he records coming into a Sufi group, and they claim to be a Christian group, and he says from their own accounts he could observe they seem to come from even older sources. And according to these peoples, Jesus escaped from the cross, was hidden by friends, was helped to flee India, where he had been before during his youth, and settled in Kashmir, where he is revered as an ancient teacher, Yus Asaf. It is from this period of the supposed life of Jesus that these people claim to have got their message. Now, Holger Kirsten, that's the basis of his book, Jesus Lived in India, that Jesus made it into Afghanistan and into India, and there's a number of relics there that purport, and a tradition that purport to be from Jesus, you know. So that's pretty interesting that's the case, you know. And on the crucifixion itself, well, the resurrection and crucifixion is basically a Catholic dogma. And it's so pivotal to their faith. Elaine Pagels, the Gnostic scholar, writes, the doctrine of the resurrection serves an essential political function. It legitimizes the authority of certain men who claim to exercise exclusive leadership over the churches as successors of the Apostle Peter, reputed to have been the first to witness the risen Jesus after the cross, from the 2nd century. The doctrine has served to validate the apostolic succession of bishops, the basis of papal authority to this day. Gnostic Christians who interpret resurrection in other ways have a lesser claim to authority. When they claim priority of the orthodoxy, they are denounced as heretics. So the crucifixion is the pivotal point for the Roman Catholic Church. And without that cross, and the resurrection and the cleansing of sins and all that mythology, old man Christianity tumbles over and falls on his crippled legs. So the Roman Catholic Church has always considered those who deny the literal crucifixion and resurrection of Christ to be the worst kind of heretics. And that was one of the main points of contention between them and the Gnostics, along with the use of anointing oil versus water baptism, which is experiential shamanistic religion versus faith-based religion. They also believed that the resurrection was something that, the resurrection of the spirit that happened while you were alive, not a physical, literal resurrection from the death. And they denied the crucifixion in that way, and that was why, in the Roman Catholic view, they had to go. And then again, in medieval times, we see this same heresy rising up with the Cathars, rising up with the Templars, who were burned at the stake for trampling on the cross and denying the cross. And this pivotal thing. So all of this religion's based on this kind of flimsy story, right, about the cross and the cleansing of sins, which now can be taken to either, you can take a number of views on this. Either it didn't happen at all, the whole thing's just completely revamping of the whole mythological death and resurrection of the sun god, or you can say it happened, Jesus actually died, and unlike anybody else in history, rose from the dead after 3 days of decomposition, or you could say that, well, there's so much history based around this, so many people have referred to it, maybe something did happen, and that Jesus took a soporific potion that induced a death-like state of catalepsy and faked his own death. And that's the